Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to the video for the Salvia Supply Stand. I have one of the samples that I made here so that I can show you what it looks like. So when it is closed, this is what the outside looks like. So there's just one main exterior fabric that is one piece for the entire exterior. And it does have, it sort of looks similar to a school binder. It has a thickness here, and that's going to serve two purposes. First is to allow some space here for the items you're going to be inserting into the supply stand, but it's also going to be the base of your stand as well once the stand is opened. So there's just Velcro closure here. And then what you'll do is you turn this around, and then you just flip this over and line up your Velcro like this, and now it becomes a stand. So there are two sides to the stand, so there's the base here, but then the two main sides. One side has elastics, and I do give suggestions for elastic placement in the pattern. But I would really encourage you to customize these placements for the items that you intend to add to your stand. For example, I did make one for my niece as an art supply stand. So all I did for the elastics was I did similar placement to these, because it's just a set of art markers on this side. So you'll want to customize this placement, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. Now on this side, you just have two clear vinyl pockets. I used clear vinyl because then you can see exactly what's in each of the pouches, and these pouches are inserted inside a seam here and here. And if you open them up, you can put all sorts of items in there. I just have a thread snips and some spools of thread in this one. And in this one, I just have a rotary cutter. Now, I could have made elastic placement for the rotary cutter on this side, but I actually did the placement here to fit my smaller 28mm rotary cutter. So that's just an example of why you might want to customize the placement of the elastics, because if you're using a 45mm rotary cutter like this one, you'll need to increase the spacing inside the elastic loops. Okay, we're going to go through the pattern now. One important thing to note is that, especially for the main exterior here, this is a really large pattern piece. So if you don't feel like cutting and taping all of these pieces together, which it can, I tried to make it as clear as possible, but it can be a little bit confusing. What you may want to do instead is just follow all of the cutting measurements that are in the cutting chart. And then there's only one pattern piece you would need to print, which is the flat firm interfacing pattern piece. And I do believe that I mentioned all of this in the pattern pieces section on page 2. So read this section very carefully and then make your decision whether you want to print the pattern pieces and tape them together, or if you prefer to just cut to measurements. And there is only, in which case there's only two pieces you're going to need to print, which is the flat firm interfacing, and that's because it's not a rectangle. It does have a shape to it, so you'll want to print and cut that one out. And then I included, trying to find that now. Oh, it's in here. I supplied this corner cutout template, which is on page 12. And so if you decide to just cut to measurements, you're going to need this just to cut out the shape of your corners. One very important thing I'd like to mention before we start cutting out and taping our pattern pieces is to read the pattern pieces section carefully, especially when it comes to how you should be printing these out. You need to be printing the pattern pieces using Adobe Reader. And you also need to make sure that the scaling is set to actual size. Do not set it to 100%. Most of the printing errors that I see occur are because we are printing at a scale of 100%, or we're not using Adobe Reader. So what happens, because the pattern was written for Adobe Reader, it does print accurately in using that software, which is free software. And sometimes what's happening is when your scaling is set to 100%, there's a miscommunication between your computer or your tablet or whatever and your printer, and sometimes it doesn't actually print it the correct size unless it is set to a scaling of actual size. So it's a little radio button option on the print dialog box that appears. So you want to make sure that you're set to actual size and not a scale of 100%. So I'm going to show you how to tape together the pattern pieces very shortly. I just want to mention that on top of the cutting chart, on page 3, I've also included some photographs that show the names of all of the various pieces so that you can decide your fabric placement. Now, I am going to be making some kits, some sewing kits for this pattern. If you have purchased a sewing kit, I've already decided all of the different fabrics for you and where they're going to be placed on the stand. So this is less important for you, but you can still refer to it just so that you know the different parts. Once you had a chance to read through the entire pattern, and if you've decided to print and tape together the pattern pieces, I'm going to show you how to do this. So the first and the largest pattern piece is called full body. So you'll need pages 13 to 16, I believe. It's written in the pattern pieces section of the page 2, the first page. Okay, so these are the 4 pages that you're going to need if you're taping together the full body pattern piece. So this one, usually I use little flower symbols to show you which lines need to be taped together. But because this one here has 2 rather large pattern pieces that need to be assembled, I decided to use shaded boxes with letters for this pattern piece, just so that you don't get confused between this one and I believe it is the exterior top A pattern piece, because they're sort of similar, just this one is much longer. So what we're going to start by doing, now one thing that I do when I'm taping pattern pieces together is that I don't cut right at the dash line along both lines that I'm going to tape together. I do leave a little bit of paper along the one side so that I can overlap them slightly before I tape them together. So I'm going to start by taping together the 2A lines. So I'm going to leave the paper along this side of the line, but I'm going to cut this one right at the dash line. Now there is another section here. I'm just going to cut that away for now so we don't get confused. Set that aside. Okay, so now I'm going to take these 2 lines together. Now don't be too worried about being slightly off. It's not going to make a huge amount of difference in the end product. If you were more than the seam allowance off, then that would definitely be a huge problem. But if you're a tiny bit off, it's not really going to make that much of a difference. Okay, so these 2 are taped together. So now we need to find the pieces that have a letter B or a letter D. So here's my line with letter B. Now because I have extra paper here, I'm going to be able to cut right at the dash line on this piece. Now we're just going to line these up and tape them together. As you can see, this is becoming very long. So now I need to find the piece that has a letter D on one side, letter C on the other side. So that's this one here. Now because we have a little bit of paper here to overlap, I'm going to cut these right at the dash line. And then that's going to be taped together like this. Okay. Now I need to find a piece that has the letter E. So that is this one here. And because I have a little bit of extra paper here, I am going to cut right at the dash line again on this piece. And my last little piece is here at the bottom, so I'll just cut that off here. And I do have paper here to overlap, so I can go ahead and cut right at the dash line on these two sides. Now this pattern piece is ready. I'm going to place it this way so you can see it all. So you're going to want to just finish cutting it out along the exterior solid line, and then that pattern piece will be ready to use. Now the other, so these are simple. You could just cut around the solid line. Same for this one, just cut around the solid line. Same for this one, cut around the solid line. Same for these two, cut along the solid line. And interior section A is another piece that we are going to need to tape together. And like I mentioned previously, for this one I didn't use the letters, I used symbols. So we have stars, little flowers, I don't know what that's called. So I'm finding the matching flower symbol here, the star symbol here, and then this piece is going to be taped here. So you use the same method that I just used. You leave a little bit of paper to overlap along one of the lines of the pair, and then cut along the dash line on the other one. So these three pieces are going to be taped together. And then here you are taping these two together and these two together, and this one is just cut along the exterior solid line. So I'm going to go ahead and finish taping those together, and then we're going to cut out our fabric and interfacing. Now we're going to go through the list of supplies you're going to need. Now for the exterior fabric, I wrote in the pattern 12 inches wide by 25 inches high. I didn't write in yardage because it's really just a piece this size. Now, if you're buying yardage, you'll need a 3/4 of a yard to get the length, but you're going to have a lot left over. This is using less than 1/3 of that 3/4 of a yard. Now for the lining fabric, in total you're going to need about 2/3 of a yard of that lining fabric, but I like to mix up a few different coordinating fabrics, which is what I'm going to do in this video. So as long as you have a total of 2/3 of a yard lining fabric, and just make sure that you have enough to cut out the pieces that you want to use for the different types. So if you look at my sample here, I used one fabric for the exterior, one for the main lining. I used a different print for inside the pockets, and then I used a fourth print for the binding pieces and this upper section here, and as well as the back of the pouches. So I'm going to be doing the same with this one, and I've chosen a combination of these three fabrics to use on the inside and this one on the exterior. You're also going to need a piece of clear vinyl, 10 inches by 10 inches. This one's a little bit bigger than that. I like to give a little bit extra. So if you've purchased a kit from me, it's going to have all of these, and I'm going to have additional instructions on which of the lining fabrics to use to cut which pieces. So I'm using my clear vinyl, I'm using this hot pink confetti vinyl. In terms of interfacing, you're going to need three types of interfacing. You're going to need a 3/4 of a yard of fusible woven interfacing. A lightweight or even a medium weight will work. I have a full yard here because I sell the interfacing, so I have lots in stock. And then you're going to need a lot of firm sew-in interfacing. So in the pattern, I've mentioned to use Pelon Peltex, which is 20 inches wide, and you're going to need 2/3 of a yard. Unfortunately, I'm out of it, but I do have this product called Stiff Stuff, which is very, very, very similar to Peltex. It's just a smidge thinner, but it's essentially the same thing. So I'm going to be using that instead. And then the last thing you're going to need, you have two options. You can either use a heavyweight fusible woven interfacing, or you can use Decaville Light. I personally am not a fan of Decaville, so I have my own heavyweight interfacing. It's a woven interfacing, fusible. I'm going to be using that instead, and you're only going to need a 1/4 yard of that. And I think I forgot to mention, but the Peltex, the 20 inch wide, you're going to need 2/3 of a yard. Now you're going to need some craft sticks. So I've get a lot of questions. What is a craft stick? So it could be called a popsicle stick, a tongue depressor. So I buy the bigger version. These are more the tongue depressor size, and I purchased these on Amazon. They are 6 inches long. So you're going to need 10 of these. Then you're going to need two 10-inch pieces of zipper tape, each with one pull on them. You can use any size of zipper tape. Could be a number 3, 4.5, number 5. All of these will work because you'll see when we're assembling the pouches that there's a little bit of flexibility there. So you can use whatever you have on hand. You're also going to need a 7-inch piece of Velcro or hook and loop tape. So pardon this sound, it's a bit, I hate this sound, but it's 1 inch wide, and you're going to need 7 inches, and make sure that you have both the hook and the loop portion. And then the last thing you're going to need is 1 yard of 1/2 inch wide elastic. You can also use fold over elastic because it comes in a lot of pretty colors. I'm just going to use white elastic because that's what I have on hand. So now we're going to cut out our pieces, and then we're going to interface everything. Okay, so I'm just going to follow the cutting chart and cut in the same order as the chart. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the full body. I'm going to be using the pattern pieces. If you've decided to cut to measurements, don't forget that you're going to cut the dimensions in the cutting chart for this piece, and then you're going to use the corner template that I provided in the pattern. This is in the last page of the instructions, I believe. Right here. So you're going to use that little template to cut out the shape of your corners. Okay, so I'm going to start by cutting out this full body piece from my exterior. So one thing that I like to do to keep my pieces organized is just leave them together with the pattern piece. I'm going to need to cut some fusible woven interfacing a bit later, and I'll do that after. The next thing we're going to cut is interior section A, which is this piece here. And that's going to be part of the main lining. So I've decided to use this print. And again, it's not a directional print, which is what I prefer. Okay, so again, I'm just going to keep these pieces together. I'm also going to cut out interior section C and interior section B from this pattern piece. I'm going to first press out the crease here. Now for the pouch body pattern piece, I always like to use a different fabric for the inside of the vinyl window. So what I'm going to be using this one for is the fabric that you're seeing here behind the vinyl. And now you're going to use the same pattern piece to cut out two of these. And what I'm cutting out now is the back of the pouch here. And we're going to cut the remaining pieces we need from this fabric. So two of them are cut using pattern pieces, and then the binding I'm going to cut using the ruler. So you need these two pieces. You need the zipper upper section and the vinyl binding piece. And we're also going to be cutting our pouch binding. I might actually start with the pouch binding, so I'm skipping down. And these have to be 2¼ inches by 22 inches long. So 2¼ inches tall, or high rather. And then I'm cutting them a little bit bigger here. I only need 22 inches, but I'm actually cutting 24. And I need two of those because there are two pouches. So there's one. And there's two. So I'm cutting on the fold here. So This pieces look smaller, but they're this long. Okay, so these are the two pouch binding pieces. And all I have left to do is cut two vinyl binding and two zipper upper section. I should clarify the zipper upper section. It's this part here, right here, just above the zipper. Now I'll show you what the vinyl binding is located. That's this piece here. And then these longer pieces, the pouch binding, that's the binding piece that goes all the way around. Now we're going to cut out our vinyl windows. And of course, I think those are pretty self-explanatory, but it's these clear vinyl windows. Okay, so there's our two pieces, and I'm going to keep them like this. Now we need to cut out some interfacing. I'm going to start with the easiest parts, which are these firm interfacing pieces. Okay, so we have the base firm interfacing, the flat firm interfacing, and the section firm interfacing. Now these are hidden inside here, but I'll explain where they are so that you can understand. I'm going to open this and lay it flat. So the flat firm interfacing is inside the flap, obviously. The base firm interfacing is in the base. And the section firm interfacing, there's one here and one here. Now you're actually cutting two pieces of these, and then we're going to make a sandwich with our craft sticks in the middle. But first, what we're going to do is cut these pieces out. So for the firm interfacing, I am using, like I said, I'm out of Peltex, so I'm using Stiff Stuff, which is very, very similar. And I'm going to start with the section firm interfacing pieces. So we need 4 of these. Okay, so we're going to set these pieces aside with our craft sticks for now. And then we're going to cut out 1 flap firm interfacing piece and 2 of the base firm interfacing. Okay, so I have the most pieces to cut out of the fusible woven interfacing, so I'm going to do that last. Uh, I have a lot less pieces to cut out of um, the the fusible woven, the heavyweight fusible woven interfacing, or Decaville if you're using that. Okay, so out of the heavyweight fusible interfacing, we are going to cut out one section firm interfacing. So you'll just remember we just cut out 4 of these from Peltex or any other firm sew-in interfacing. And this is the last piece we'll be cutting from this pattern piece. And I will keep those together. Then we're also going to cut out one interior section C. Cut that along the top edge. So you'll remember so far we've cut one lining fabric from this, and we're also going to be cutting out some fusible woven interfacing, the light or medium weight. Okay, so again, I'm keeping all of my pieces together. So there's the fabric piece I cut earlier. And just set that aside. And then we're going to need to cut 2 interior section B. So you're going to need 2 of these because you've cut 2 from the fabric. And the last piece is the flap firm interfacing piece. So all you're going to be cutting is 1 sew-in interfacing and 1 heavyweight fusible from this pattern piece. That's all you need to cut. Okay, and now we can keep these pieces together. Okay, and we don't need this. So the last thing we're going to need to do is cut our lightweight fusible woven interfacing. And we're cutting pretty much almost all of the pieces out of this one. So we're going to start with our full body piece. Next, we are going to cut interior section A. Next, we're going to cut out interior section B, which is right here. And we're going to cut out 2 because we have 2 pouches. I feel like I sound a bit like a broken record, but okay. So in total, you have from this pattern piece 2 lining fabric, 2 fusible woven interfacing lightweights or medium weight, and 2 heavyweight. And the last one is interior section C. So in total, for interior section C, you should have your lining fabric, your fusible woven interfacing lightweight, and your fusible woven interfacing heavyweight. And we're going to be trimming seam allowance from that, but I'll show you that when we are actually fusing our interfacing. For pouch body, we need 4 of those because we have 4 pieces of fabric. 2 pieces that are going to be the back of the pouch and 2 pieces that are going to be behind the vinyl window. Okay, so I have all of my pouch body pieces now for lining fabrics and for fusible woven interfacing. Okay, the last piece we're going to cut is the zipper upper section, and we need 2 of those. Okay, and then last thing for the elastic, since I have a yard here, I just need to cut it into 2 pieces of equal length. Now, I'm going to mention this a little bit later on, but depending on how you sew your elastic loops, you may need more or less than what I've recommended. So if you're following the markings and the pattern, you'll have enough with a yard, which you will cut into 2 18-inch lengths. But if you're customizing and you're making a lot of really large loops, you're probably going to need a bit more. So to be safe, you might want to get more like 1.5 yards or 1.25 yard of elastic. So that's it for the cutting. Next, we're going to do the interfacing. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to fuse our lightweight interfacing to the wrong side of all of the matching fabric pieces. Now when I'm done fusing, I'm just going to again place them together with their pattern piece. Now for the interior section C, heavyweight interfacing, don't fuse that just yet. We're going to wait for that. Again, for interior section B, don't fuse the heavyweight just yet. Set it aside for now. Okay, so now that we've added all of our lightweight fusible woven interfacing, we are going to add some heavyweight interfacing, the fusible. So we're going to start with interior section B. So you have these two pieces. And we're going to trim away the seam allowance along one of the longer sides. Now we also need to remove an inch from the width because we want to leave a space here and here. We don't want this heavy weight to be within the seam allowance. So I'm just going to remove 1 inch. Okay, so you center that this way, and then you leave the seam allowance space along one longer side, and then fuse that in place. Now, whether you're using a woven fusible for this or Decaville Light, just make sure that it's properly fused so it doesn't come off during the assembly. Now we're going to do the same thing for interior section B. So this time we're going to do the same thing. We're going to, except this time we're going to trim the seam allowance from both sides. So what I do just to make it easier is I just remove 1 inch from the one longer side and 1 inch from the shorter side. It's a little bit more than the seam allowance, but that's fine. It ends up working out. And this time, if you're using a directional print, you want the gap. Well, it won't matter because you're going to leave a gap at the top and the bottom of this piece, so you're just centering it. Okay, so for the next step, you're going to need the interior section A piece. And you're going to flip it over so it's wrong side facing up. And then you're going to need your full body pattern piece. And we're going to be marking the location of the flap dividing line and the base dividing line on the wrong side of the interior section A piece. Now, if you didn't print out the pattern pieces, you're probably wondering where are these lines located. So I'm going to give you the measurements for those. So if you're looking at the top edge here, this one is 3 inches from the top rounded corners. And then this line here is 6 inches from the top edge. So they're 3 inches apart. This way, and then this way. So 3 inches, then 6 inches down from the top. Okay, so I am going to be fusing interfacing in these areas. So it's better if you use a pen that will not disappear, like a fabric pen. Usually they disappear with heat. So we're going to want to not do that in this case. And it's on the wrong side, so as long as you're not marking too darkly, it's going to be fine in the end. So I just transferred the location of those lines on either end, and then I'm just going to draw a line across. Okay, and then you're going to need your flat firm interfacing, the heavyweight fusible piece. And you're also going to need your section firm interfacing heavyweight fusible. This one here. Okay, I'm going to get my ironing mat. Okay, so your flat firm interfacing heavyweight fusible, you're going to place that in the flap area. So place it so it's just above that line that you drew, and make sure that there's an equal amount of space all the way around. And then the section firm interfacing, this one you're just going to center in this area. So you're not putting anything in the base portion. You're just putting this in the portion afterwards, the larger section. Okay, so once those are on, we're going to set that aside with its pattern piece. Now, before we do these craft stick sandwiches, we're just going to glue the two base firm interfacing pieces together. Better take my mat out so I don't get it full of glue. I'm just using Fabri-Tac fabric glue. And we're doing this now so that everything has time to dry. The glue has time to dry before we start sewing them. These are used at the very end of assembly, so that gives them plenty of time to dry between now and then. So I like to run one bead all along the exterior edge, and then put a little bit in the middle as well. Okay, place these together. And then you can just put something heavy on top or use clips to hold them in place while they dry. I'm just going to put my rotary cutter on top. Okay, so now we're going to need two of the section firm interfacing sew-in pieces and 5 craft sticks. Okay, so what I do first is I glue the craft sticks to one piece. Don't worry too much about where you have them placed, as long as there's a bit of space in between them, because we are going to roll up this sandwich when we need to stuff it inside the exterior and lining in final assembly. And of course, stay away from the edges so that we don't accidentally sew over craft sticks a little bit later. So I just run a bead of glue on each one. Now, some of my testers used glue guns. You can do that, but I just wouldn't put the glue too thick, because you need this sandwich to stay a little bit flexible, so you can kind of roll it up to insert it in the final assembly. Okay, and then again, I do a bead of glue on each stick. And then all the way around. I'm pretty generous with the glue that I put on the edges because I just don't want the sandwich to open up. And for this, I'm going to use clips to hold them in place while the glue dries. Okay, set that aside, and then we're going to do exactly the same thing for the 2 remaining pieces and the 5 remaining craft sticks. So that's the end of video 1. In the next video, we're going to begin the assembly of our stand.